Welcome to Satsang. Another absolutely unexpected, spontaneous downpour. It was so beautiful, so unexpected and so beautiful. So, as always, we start with a question that's come in advance, but tonight I got handed 2 questions from some people here on the way in. So rather than take those that have come in online, we'll start with something that just came in right here, and then open it up to any questions that anyone here may have. Is duty toward oneself higher than duty to others? They're not nearly as separate as one may think. As long as we are defining the self properly, and as long as we understand what the duty to others actually means. So, first of all, when we talk about duty to self, that doesn't mean duty to my ego. It doesn't mean duty to my fears. It doesn't mean duty to my desires. It doesn't mean duty to the stories that I tell myself. It doesn't mean duty to my false identities. It means duty to my higher, true self. Now, our higher, true, divine self, one of the most powerful ways to actually know the self and experience the self is through what we call karma yoga, which is the yoga of action, right? There's so many different yogas, paths of union, but karma yoga is that path toward union of action, in which I'm using literally every minute and every moment, whatever I am doing, to get closer to God. That my very action, because you look at, for example, bhakti yoga, okay, that's the yoga of devotion, the yoga of love, as I'm worshiping God. Or Jnana Yoga, I'm learning, deeply imbibing, studying, contemplating. But Karma Yoga's action, and in many cases we understand that as service. It's not always. Sometimes it's quite literally every step I take. But very frequently it's service. It's the awareness that who we each are vehicles, instruments, tools. We say nimitta matram, that instrument in God's hands. So service to others can very well be a really critical part of your own dharma, of your path to understand your true self. So they're not so separate. The dilemma becomes when we think that serving others or fulfilling a duty to others is fulfilling a duty to their ego or their stories or their dramas, this room, I'm just going to stop for a moment. This room offers us a very special opportunity, different than being in the garden where people come in and from behind. The very special opportunity in this room is to practice not getting distracted. The world is very distracting. We've become addicted to distraction. Our devices beep, they blink, they buzz, and every second we're on this like hyper alert for anything that makes a noise, a light, a sound, a vibration, because, oh my God, it could be somebody liked my post, or it could be a text. We've become primed to be on hyper alert. Now, even sitting here when gracefully no one has their phone out, we're still primed toward that hypervigilance for anything other than that which we actually want to be focusing on. And this is a tragedy that we have in all areas of our life. It's why nobody's able to concentrate anymore. It's why we're not able to focus. It's why nobody reads books anymore. I mean, there's a whole science around what's actually happening to our brains as we get addicted to distraction. But you notice it when you're in a situation like this where an entry door is kind of in the middle of where we are. And just see, it's not Amitabh Bachchan walking through the door. Right? It's not Modiji walking through the door. Nobody's walking in naked. I mean, ultimately, it's not anything of particular note except somebody's walking in. But we've become so primed to distraction that somebody comes in, somebody opens their purse, somebody sneezes, somebody changes the cross of their legs, and you'll see 80% of the heads go like this. Like we've never heard somebody sneeze before. Like we've never heard a zipper open before. And it's an opportunity because awareness is the first step of our spiritual practice. And just notice how very flimsy our ability to focus has become. You're here. Nobody grabbed you and threw you into satsang and said, thou must sit down. You're here because you want to be here. And yet, every shift of seated position of everybody sitting in the room, anybody moves, anybody enters, and almost all of the heads turn. And it's just to notice, to become aware of, wow, what has happened to our ability to concentrate, to focus? What slaves we've become to every tiny thing that happens. What anybody else is doing. Like we've never seen somebody fidget before. You've never seen somebody rub their nose before. It's really interesting. And the garden doesn't present us with quite such an opportunity because outside with the ambient noise, there's always kind of a little bit of a buzz going on anyway, and so you tend not to notice when the person next to you changes the cross of their legs or opens their bag to take out a cough drop or a bottle of water or something. But in here, where we're essentially soundproof, notice how easy it is to get distracted. And just use it as an opportunity to be aware, to make a choice. There's so much in this world we don't have control over. And if we had a magic wand, how much we would change about the world. The wars we'd end, the poverty we'd end, the hunger we'd end. The climate change we'd end. I mean, there's so much that we would do in the world if we did have control. But we don't. But we do have control over our own concentration, our own focus, our own mind. And when we get our own minds under our control, then everything becomes possible in life. And until we get our minds under our control, then pretty much nothing is possible. I mean, literally there's statistics these days about something like, can't remember exactly, but I think it was 70% of people have not read a book in the last year. Now, these are new statistics. This is not what it was like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. This has nothing to do with literacy rates. I mean, these are statistics from the US, from Europe, from the Western world. It's that we're literally unable to stick with something long enough. If you can't give it in a 30-second soundbite, nobody's able to pay attention. And so we miss the real depth of life. We were talking the other night about having in-depth conversations and how rare they've become. Because everybody's got their devices out and we're kind of half paying attention to the person in front of us and half paying attention to our device. So this is all just to say that this room presents us with a special opportunity to first just simply be aware. Don't criticize yourself, don't judge yourself, but just notice how flimsy your grip on your own awareness and focus is, how quickly and easily against your will you are distracted by meaningless things. Because the moment you're aware of it, then you actually get to start exerting some conscious control. And that's ultimately what spirituality is about. So, back to the actual question. As I was saying, when we talk about duty to others or service of others, it's important to realize that it's not of their ego. It's not of their story. It's not of their agenda. When we talk about serving others, our duty to others, it's not that my duty is to make sure that no one has to ever face the agenda in their mind not happening, that no one ever has to learn to grow or adapt or change. I'm not in service of someone else's false identity, the story they tell themselves about what they need. In service of others has two components. Number one, physical, making sure they are quite literally okay, fed, clothed, housed, health is good, all of that. And the other is spiritual, tending to their heart, their real highest spiritual needs, and obviously keeping them as happy as we can. But our duty is never to ensure that someone is kept happy by subjugating ourself, by sacrificing our dharma, our path, simply because it's uncomfortable for someone. I don't want to make them uncomfortable, therefore I'm not going to tell them this or that. I'm not going to live this aspect of my life, even though it's so clearly my dharma. It's so clearly what my path is. That doesn't serve anybody. I mean, you think you've sacrificed for them, but you have not done them a favor. Because remember, we're all here, unfolding our karmic packages so that we get closer and closer to God, closer and closer to truth. Not so that our loved ones can walk on eggshells around us and make sure that we never have an uncomfortable moment having to face something that wasn't part of our agenda. And so when you talk about duty to the self and duty to others, we realize it's a duty to my highest self, true self, fullest self, and a duty to someone else's also highest, deepest, fullest, truest self. And in some cases, depending on our role and relationship with them, to their physical self. If we're responsible for actually taking care of someone, then it's on a physical level. But not, I repeat, not to prevent people from having to face things that are ultimately going to make them grow. Maybe uncomfortable in the moment, but ultimately it's what's going to bring them growth and change. And that's what they're here for. So don't ever sacrifice your truth, your dharma, your path, just so that someone else doesn't have to have an uncomfortable moment. You're not doing anyone any good. Don't ever sacrifice yourself, your truth, your path, because it makes someone else angry. Let them learn to deal with anger. Because if you just protect them from it now, they'll have to just deal with it later in life or deal with it next life. I mean, nobody gets a free pass on learning how to deal with anger. It's not like you've protected them from it, therefore they are, absolved of having to work with it karmically. It'll just be something else that later, out of your control, will arise their anger, and then they'll have to deal with it. Some of the greatest lessons in life arise when the universe does not act how we think it should. There was a beautiful divine saint who used to live just across the river from us, bless you, named Pujya Dayananji Maharaj. And he had a beautiful line. He used to say, I don't care how much you make, what your career is. These are not ways of defining success. The only definition of success that matters is how you respond to the inevitable times, inevitable, when the universe does not behave the way you think it should. That's the only definition of success that mattered. So us preventing someone else from learning to respond when the universe does not act how they think it should is not actually doing them any favors. But also us acting out of our ego, our fears, our desires, our false self, just in rebellion against others, or in a selfishness against others, well, that also doesn't serve anybody. So the duty is always to the highest self, mine and yours. Mine first, obviously. I mean, we're put here on earth to fulfill our dharma, not someone else's. So obviously that comes first. But our dharma and our karma is very inextricably linked with a lot of other people's. The threads of our life weave with the threads of other people's lives. So we're not separate. And so those duties actually end up blending together. It's not always easy. But ultimately, in serving your highest dharma, your highest truth, you're actually doing the very best thing for everyone around you that you can possibly be doing. They may not immediately thank you for it. They may not immediately appreciate you for it. But ultimately, it is in their highest service as well. Whether it's because it's forcing them to look at things, forcing them to adapt, forcing them to grow, or whether it's simply because you being that committed and that courageous actually creates a space in which they can live their highest truth. That through you they learn how to not necessarily pander to everybody else's false self and ego self that thinks that they need you to be in a certain way. So the more true we are, the more we create space for others. Questions? Yes, of course.
While going through various scriptures, we come terms.
I'm sorry, I can't. Just Inko Sandeep Bhaiya, let's go to that. Yeah, thanks.
While reading certain scriptures, we come with the terms renunciation, non-attachment, and for that matter, holy indifference.
Can you just repeat that? While reading certain scriptures. Mike Chodiega Korba, it's not working. It's not working anyway.
We come across these terms.
We come across
these terms while reading.
These terms. Thank you.
I don't tell them words.
That's okay. No problem.
These are terms.
No problem. Which terms?
Renunciation, non-attachment, but for that matter, holy indifferences.
Non-attachment, holy indifferences, and what was the first?
And renunciation.
Renunciation. Thank you.
So it is so easy to understand its essence.
Okay, sure, beautiful. Renunciation, non-attachment, and holy indifference. So he's given us the English of these terms. And I mention that because I am not a Sanskrit scholar. However, I have come to believe over the many years that I've been here that the English translation of some of these Sanskrit terms is not actually correct and ends up leading to confusion. So for example, non-attachment, well, the Sanskrit of that is vairagya. Now, when we think about not being attached, in English, if two things are attached, my fingers are attached, or we could say these pieces of paper are attached. In order to not be attached, I have unattached them. A synonym of that is connection, right? Here they are connected. When I have unattached them, I have essentially disconnected them. Disconnection is not what vairagya means. And the way that you know that, again, not from a Sanskrit grammar way, because that is not my forte, but just from the depth of the meaning. If you look at the enlightened masters, you look at the stories of Bhagwan Krishna, Bhagwan Ram, so you look at all of the examples that we have in human form of how we are supposed to be the embodiments of these highest spiritual virtues. None of them lives in a way that you would describe as disconnected or indifferent. Uncaring, really? They're the opposite of that. Every enlightened master I have been blessed to be in their presence of is the most connected, present, compassionate, caring, being I've ever been blessed to be in the presence of. They're the exact opposite of the words we typically hear. Non-attachment, disconnection, indifference, aloof. These are not words of actual virtue when you look at them from the English. What vairagya means, and I have to admit, I came upon this awareness just by divine providence. I was sitting listening to a lecture, a katha of the beautiful scriptures and beautiful stories. And in this, the speaker was talking about bhakti, not as the virtue of devotion, but actually as the embodied being, as the woman of bhakti, who was actually a being in the Puranas. And bhakti had two sons, Gyan and Vairagya. Now, bhakti is juicy devotion. It's not dry love. It's not the, do you love me? Of course I love you. Why do you need to hear me say I love you? Of course, would I be here if I didn't love you? It's not that. It's juicy love, juicy devotion. We talk about the ras of bhakti. Ras is like the liquid, the juice, the essence, the gravy, right? Now, how can juicy devotion give birth to dry disconnection, detachment? He wasn't adopted. Now, what I realized in that moment when I heard the story was, so to have vairagya, you need bhakti. You can't have the son without the mother, which also interestingly means, on a different subject, to have gyan you need bhakti. That they're not nearly as separate paths as some of us think. First, we are in juicy love of God. Devotion to God. The more filled we can be with bhakti, the more automatically our attachment to the little things of this world dissipates. It's the most natural thing on earth. It's not a harsh disconnection. I've come to think of it not as detachment, but as reattachment. So currently we are attached to the little things in the world. My possessions, my this, my that, my respect, my ijjat, how people talk to me, whether they do what I want. All of these little things. This is what we're stuck with. We reattach ourselves to God through devotion, through bhakti. And vairagya, detachment, is the natural offspring of that. Because if you are truly immersed in love of God, somebody putting a nasty comment on something you posted online really is not going to impact you. You're not going to find yourself in a Twitter war with someone over some rude comment that they did. When you're just swimming in love of God, you're not going to be worried about rushing to the 24 hours left of the sale that ends tomorrow and honking your horn to get everybody out of the way because you've got to get there to buy the stuff before the sale ends. When you're in juicy love of God. So that attachment to the things, it dissipates automatically. So vairagya is that natural detachment from the stuff that plagues most of us through being reattached to the divine. And indifference, I'll come to renunciation last, indifference. Again, the English of indifference, this is not a virtue we should look for. It means I really couldn't care less. I'm totally indifferent. Doesn't matter. Now, indifference is a quality, again, of disconnection. We are not meant to be disconnected from the world. What we are meant to be is not attached to the dichotomies. So in the Bhagavad Gita, when Bhagwan Krishna is speaking about how to recognize the yogi, the wise one, he says it is one who is not affected, impacted by pleasure, pain, gain, loss, success, failure. So this is the indifference. I shouldn't be impacted in a way like the waves of the ocean where I'm just going up and down. Gains come, I'm up. Losses, I'm down. Pleasures, I'm up. Pains, I'm down. What I want happens, I'm up. It doesn't, I'm down. I should be balanced, exactly. Equanimity would be my word of choice rather than indifference. It's not that I don't care. It's that I am balanced in all of them. I'm able to be the same, anchored, grounded, connected, regardless of whether we go for Chinese food or Mexican food. It's not going to impact me. Sure, wherever you want to go, we go, because I'm not going to be impacted by that. It's just something that sustains my body. I get a beautiful comment on social media, it's not going to make my night. I get a nasty comment, it's not going to ruin my night. I'm not even going to read them. I'm not going to pay attention to them. Because I'm balanced. I'm not hooked into the ups and downs on the waves. So that's this holy indifference. I would use the word equanimity instead. And then lastly, renunciation. So when you think about sannyas, as you mentioned, it's a very specific monastic renunciation of very specific things. Sex, sensual pleasures, ownership, family connections in the way that they hinder our spiritual progress, in the way that that attachment would thwart us from moving forward. But the truth is that none of those things which we renounce are actually the things that would keep you from being enlightened or awakened. We renounce them in sannyas because it's a particular dharma, a monastic dharma. Some of us have the dharma to be monastic renunciants. Many people don't. There's no sense of a better dharma or a worse dharma, that somehow sannyas is better than grihast dharma. Ultimately, anyway, according to the Indian tradition, everybody eventually, in the last phase of their life, enters the sannyas ashram phase. But when you think about renunciation, the part that's more important, unless you're planning to be a sannyasi, unless you're actually thinking right now of taking monastic vows, what's much more important than renouncing those things is renouncing the stuff that does actually keep you from being enlightened or awakened or even in peace, in joy, in love, which is the games of the mind. Jealousy, anger, grudges, judgment, negativity, false identification. You can give up sex, you can give up your family, you can give up ownership, and you can still be miserable in a mind that is full of anger and grudges, judgment, false identification. There's no guarantee whatsoever that renouncing the things that we renounce when we become sannyasis is going to suddenly automatically grant you, forget enlightenment, even peace and joy and freedom. You have to work with the mind whatever path of life you take. Whether you are in a householder path of life, whether you're in a monastic path of life, the mind is the mind. And you've got to work with it. And ultimately, the renunciation that really matters is a renunciation of the stuff that holds us back. A renunciation of our grudges, of our pains, of our anger, of our false self, our ego, our ignorance. That's the stuff to work with first. Because otherwise, if you haven't worked with that yet and you become a sannyasi, then the fact that you are, no longer having sex, no longer having sensual pleasures, no longer with your family, then it just becomes something else to be angry about. Then it just becomes something else to have a grudge about. Something else to be judgmental and negative about. Something else to have a sense of false self about. I am better than you because I am a sannyasi. So the renunciation that matters is a renunciation of the games of the mind. That's what keeps us from freedom. And so that's the renunciation to work with. And then as your life path unfolds, as you start to get into the later years of your life, or earlier if you decide to take to this path sooner, you go into it with a full, grounded mind. Sannyas is not running away from something. It's opening to something. But you can only open to something when you've stopped running away. And as long as my mind is killing me with all of the games it's playing, I can't actually open to sannyas. So start your own practice of renunciation right now. Of what are you going to renounce? Choose a different thing once a week, once a month, whatever you think you can handle. But choose a set time frame. That, all right, for the month of October, I'm going to renounce my grudges. Not deny them or repress them or suppress them. Pretend they don't exist. Eat or drink or shop my way through them. But actually work with them so I can let go of them. Actually become free. And then the next month, renounce something else. And if you find it takes you more than a month, that's okay. There's no rush. You're not on anybody else's timeline. But at any given moment, you should be in the active process of renouncing something. And just figure out the first one. What is it that's killing you the most? What is it that's troubling you the most? What is it that impacts your meditation, your yoga, your sleep the most? Work with that first. Then when you find that you've gotten a little bit of freedom and spaciousness from that, bring in something new. That's the renunciation we need. Okay?
Any action motivated by desire, that is renunciation. So
Any action.
I got everything.
Wonderful.
From you, since I have that experience, that is why I put it that.
Of course.
You can, only saints can give answer to this one.
Beautiful. Any other questions? Yes, then we'll come to you.
How do you combine the spirituality with your daily life? Because right here we are like in this wonderful place with the Ganga River, praying and meditating, and then we go back home and what's going to happen?
So how do we combine spirituality in our normal lives, especially when we leave this heavenly place and go back? So the first and most powerful way, you can imagine this is a common question when people leave, the first and most important way is make sure that when you're here, you're really letting yourself be changed. Only then will it go home with you. If it's only as deep as a suntan, you'll lose it on the airplane home. Let that change within you go really deep. It's very easy to feel peaceful when you're away from the stresses and strains of your normal life. But you would get that lying on a beach drinking pina coladas also. There's something very different, deeper, more powerful, more transformative about being here than being on a beach sipping pina coladas. But you've got to make sure that that actual deep transformation happens. Not just, oh, I had this nice time away from the stress and strain of my normal life. And that's the work that you need to do while you're here, is really make sure that that transformation is happening inside you. And then when you go back, set up a series of things. There's a lot of different ways. Number one, reevaluate. And some of this you should do while you're here before you get back. It's good work for the plane also. Is really reevaluate how you spend your time. Some of it we have no control over. It's our jobs. We've got to put food on the table. But we've got a lot of time in our hands. And the thing you need to think about is, how are you spending it? What's your choice of ways to spend that time? Is it in alignment with your newly transformed self? And if not, then plan before you get back what you're going to do differently and write it down. Otherwise, you get back and you are in the throes of habits, back in the throes of Maya. Really make a very concrete plan. These are the activities I'm still going to do. These are the activities I'm not going to do. So my morning walk with my close friends, definitely still going to do that. Friday night at the bar, we can skip that. Really think about these things so that you know in advance what you're going into. And then figure out ways to bring your connection into your daily life. Things as simple as when you walk, what do most of us do? We're on our phones, or talking on it, or if it's longer, listening to some podcast or something. Well, can you take some time that you're just with yourself? So you're re-grounding, because these are what all of these practices need to do, is they need to reconnect you to the self who is here right now, who's having these experiences. You need to reconnect to her. So find opportunities during the day for just a few moments of silence. Before you eat, close your eyes. Have a few moments of deeply reconnecting. Before you drink water. And, you could choose different things. These are just things we tend to do a lot, so they're good opportunities. Just close your eyes, spend a few minutes reconnecting. Decide that when you're walking, you're just going to be with yourself, with your breath, reconnecting, or chanting a mantra. And recognize that this presence of the divine that you feel here exists everywhere. Look for it. Make it your daily practice to see whether you can actually see the divine in everyone. We know that the divine is in everyone. Can you see it? Just make it your daily practice. It won't be easy. That's okay. It's not about how much you succeed. It's not about what percentage of people you actually could see the divine in. It's about an intention. That instead of looking at them as physical beings, fat, thin, tall, short, white, black, brown, rather than that, can you actually look in everyone's eyes and see the divine in them? Or at least intend to. It'll change your entire way of moving through the world. You're checking out at the grocery store. Can you look in the eyes of the person checking you out and see the divine? Instead of thinking, oh my God, why is she so slow? Can you actually look in her eyes, or his eyes, and see the divine? And then keep coming back and recharging your batteries.
And definitely I'm getting the rubber band that you said.
Yes. Yes. Use the rubber band for when you forget. It's a negative reinforcement, so you don't want to do it when you're doing things right. You want to do that when it's been a moment of forgetfulness. So for example, you find yourself saying something in a tone of voice or a language that is not in alignment with your spiritual ideals. Then you do it. Or you find yourself just aimlessly, mindlessly scrolling social media without any consciousness. You do it then. And lastly, there was one question back here. Yeah. We can come back and take yours quickly. It's okay. Come back.
Yeah,
Yes.
my limited understanding is that we have various class of beings that we can see each other, for example, and then spiritually enlightened beings like, Gandharvas and Devatas, loosely translated as gods, and the Parabrahman. So my question is, what is Pujya Sadhvi Mataji's
What?
interpretation of the Brahman, Parabrahman and the God. Are they the same? Are they different? That's a question which is intriguing.
So I'm very mindful of not turning satsang into a philosophy class, but rather to keep it anchored in what it means to us. So for example, when he asked about these questions, they're philosophical terms. But for me, what matters much more than a definition of the term is how that impacts our lives. And as far as Brahman, Parabrahman, I mean the supreme reality, the ultimate, highest supreme reality, and then all of the different levels down to the devtas. And the question of how that matters for us. Yeah, there's different manifestations of the divine in different ways. Because below the devtas, of course, are us. We're also divine. Right? The Upanishads reminds us, Isha vasyamidam sarvam, yat kincha jagatyam jagat. Everything in the universe, not just the devtas, are pervaded by the divine. Everything is pervaded by the divine. So we are also divine. So that divine is in all, to different degrees of consciousness. We are on the lower side of consciousness. We're higher than a rock, higher than, a tree, higher than other species of animals, it is said. Many of them act a lot higher than we do, but it's said that the humans are the only ones who are actually able to be conscious of themselves, which is why we are the only species that can actually attain enlightenment. It's a different debate, but the divine pervades all of us. It's just a matter of awareness. So you've got us mired in our humanity, and then you've got the devtas, who are in many ways, they're divine beings, but with very human characteristics, right? I mean, sometimes I'll be telling a story in satsang and I'll say, okay, so, the gods, and this one was angry and this one was jealous. And you can just see everybody's face like, what? What do you mean? It doesn't make any sense. God's jealous, God's angry, God's having a fight with this one, God's like one-upping that one. It makes no sense when you think about it from that level. So, but they're, you could say, a higher level than we are of consciousness. What is it that keeps them from being even higher? Well, the same games of the mind that we're plagued with. The anger, the jealousies, the competition. It's also, by the way, what separates the devtas from the asuras. Ignorance. The asuras, they're the ignorant ones. That demonic energy comes out of ignorance. So the question for ourselves really is, okay, so there is a supreme reality, there is God, whatever you call it, however you conceive of it, with form, without form, with name, without name, with a name but in some other language, doesn't matter. There is an infinite supreme reality. that we believe takes form at different times in different ways. But what does that mean for us? If we are pervaded by that divinity, that supreme reality, if we are pervaded by that, well, that means we are divine. Which means that our duty here is to wake up and realize that. To realize how that divine, again, whatever I call it, pervades me. I'm not separate from it. There's no place I end and Para Brahman begins. And if I say to you, show me where I end and the Supreme begins, you can't do that. I'm inseparable from it. And that's the lesson for all of us, is this awareness that the divine is infinite, can, and in some traditions and lineages and religions does take form or manifest. In some religions doesn't manifest, doesn't matter. But there is this supreme infinite presence that is divine, that is inseparable from me, inseparable from others, inseparable from this planet Earth. Which means that we need to wake up to that and let go of the nonsense that's plaguing our lives. Let go of thinking of ourselves as so small. Let go of the false identities that we use to identify ourselves. I am this, I am that, don't you know who I am? And open our hearts to the truth of that divine presence, whatever you call it. Have a beautiful rest of your evening. A beautiful morning and day to our family joining us from all over the world. I look so forward to being together with you all tomorrow. And so much love to you all.